Stocks are not a hedge against high inflation. I'm going to prove it to you. It's easy, actually. High inflation doesn't mean you get a reprieve from stocks to keep up. It doesn't. Neither does gold. Neither is bonds. High inflation is the bugaboo. Now, there are other ways to prevent high inflation from eating you alive, but don't think stocks are going to give you the reprieve that I think a lot of you have been led to believe. Now, a lot of people say, oh, well, inflation, 2 or 3% that the Federal Reserve is targeting. Yeah, stocks can deal with that because it's a targeted inflation rate. We know for a fact that the money value will go down by 2 to 3% according to the federal target rate. And so because that's steady and well known in advance, people can plan for that. And stocks are certainly a hedge against that. That's just normal, everyday, run-the-mill inflation. Against high inflation, they're not. Now, I'm going to prove it to you. All right, so let's go to my man Daniel Kuhlbert's bucket thing here again, 55e.co to get your own 55e.co. I just use this all the time. We got Wellington, we got S&P 500, and we got Wellesley. All right, so we're going to go from the years of the high inflation years, from the 66 to 81, basically. 66 to 81 are the high inflation years, all right? All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to say we have $100,000 invested in Wellington in 66. Net of inflation, what was it worth at the end of 1981? So you can see Wellington was down 6.6% in 1966. Add 2.9% inflation, it was down 9.5. Hope that makes sense. So Wellington was up 8.2% in 1967. Take away 3.1% inflation, it was actually only netted 5.1. Actually, let's just do this right here. And we're going to say equals right there. There we go. And so you can see the Wellington Fund averaged negative 1.46 from 1966 to 1981. All right. Inflation averaged 6.9% from 1966 to 1981. And here's the inflation. It started off pretty low, but it went from 2 or 3 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 5 to 4 to 3 to 6 to 11 to 9 to 6 to 6, 7, 8. You can see. So high inflation dwarfed our rates of return, and as such, we actually lost over that, was that 15 years? 15 years, 16 years. We lost an average of 1.4% a year in Wellington. So our $100,000 was worth only $69,000 in real terms, and that's all that matters, by the way. And don't forget, you still have to pay tax on that. Even though you're losing money, you still have to pay tax. All right, so now we go to S&P 500, the same thing. So here's the inflation was it averaged 6.9%, and those 14 years of time. Let's see what there we go. And the S&P 500 averaged basically nothing. Look at that. I mean, look at that, man. It's average zero, basically 0.5%. I don't even think it was average that. Oh yeah, that's horrible, man. So the Wellington averaged lost 1.46%. S&P 500 basically nothing. I mean, is that crazy? Oh my goodness. So anyway, so here we go. The S&P 500. Let's see. Inflation was 2.9% in 1966. The S&P 500 was down 10.4, so it was down 13.3%, if that makes sense. All right. And so you can see here the S&P 500 was the next year 21. In 1960, I'm not sure what that is, 73 and 74 right here. So that'd be 1966, 67, 68. It's 1969 it was down 14. Net of inflation, 1973 and 74 is down 21 and 38% respectively. 1977 is down 14%, and 1981 is down 15%. So the S&P 500, $100,000 in net of inflation would only be worth $82,000 at the end of 1981. It did not keep up with inflation, man. It just didn't. The idea that stocks keep up with high inflation is just silly. Now, people say, well, you got a positive rate of return. How could this be? And this is sequence of returns, man. Sequence of return risk. Just because you have a positive average rate of return doesn't mean you're going to have a positive portfolio at the end of the time period. It's just not. So again, $100,000 average. We're down to $82,000, and that's without taking any distributions too, by the way. So just as an FYI, that's the S&P 500. So Wellington gave us $69,000. S&P 500 gave us $82,000. Neither of those were hedged against inflation in the 70s. All right, so Wellesley now, we only go back to 1971 because Wellesley just started in 1971. It was his first full year. It actually started in 1970, but we don't have a full year in 1970. So from 1971 to 1981, inflation averaged 8.22%. What did Wellesley average? Oops, average AVE right there. Blink. It averaged again, same thing as the S&P 500, barely averaged 1%, barely broke even essentially. And you can see our $100,000 in Wellesley was down to $96,000 at the end of 1981. So Wellesley lost money over that 10 years. Wellington lost money over the 14, as did the S&P 500. So let's do one other thing. Same period of time for Wellington as we looked at Wellesley from 1971 to 1981. Excuse me, 1981, right there, blank. 1981. Wellesley was down. Wellington was down to $80,744. Bold that, and in the S&P 500, it was down to $87,000. So again, even those 71 through 81, that's 11 years, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. In those 11 years. Well, so just check this out. In those 11 years, Wellesley was at $96,000, fell from $100,000 to $96,000. Wellington fell from $100,000 to $80,000. S&P 500 fell from $100,000 to $87,000. All right, so we click on, oops, not that. We click on this equals average. All right, right there. Let's see where average rate of return was. Again, basically just barely breaking even. Average rate of return here was down. So, I mean, 0.99 and 1.009 is basically none. And so both are essentially broke even in terms of average rates of return, net of inflation. But again, the sequence of return risk says, look, man, at the end of the day, we were down to $80,000 net of inflation over those 11 years of time in Wellington. We were down to $87,000 net of inflation over those 11 years of time in the S&P 500. Whereas Wellesley, we were down to 96,000. So you could say, I mean, you can skin this any way you want. You can say, well, at the end of the day, the bonds did better. Well, did they? I mean, I'll do a video on the Franklin, the Putnam Income Fund. I've done that before, net of inflation. I'll do that next. But there's just no evidence that stocks are a hedge against high inflation. It just isn't there. So the point being, when people say high inflation is coming heavy into stocks because high inflation, I'd say, show me the proof. Show me the proof. And they show you, well, look, here's inflation over the course of time at 2 to 3% on average, and here's your stocks. That's over the course of 30 years with an inflation target of 2 to 3% that everyone can hang their hat on. That's not what we're dealing with here right now. It's just not. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Don't take risk unnecessarily is where I'm going with this, if you don't know why you're doing it. All right, we'll see you.